Guilty of murder, Kenneth Noye begins life sentence. Inside the mind of a killer, we have a special report. Investors lose billions as shares plummet tonight. And UEFA's ban on Galatasaray fans brings relief in Leeds.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. Kenneth Noye is beginning a life sentence tonight for the murder of Stephen Cameron on a motorway slip road 4 years ago. The jury at the Old Bailey found him guilty by a majority of 11-1, rejecting his argument that he stabbed Mr Cameron in self-defence. After Noye had been sentenced, Mr Cameron's parents said justice had been done, although their pain at losing their son would go on. Noye's solicitor said he plans to appeal. Shuli Ghosh reports.
Kenneth Noye is spending the night behind bars. It isn't the first time. These pictures released today show him smiling and joking as he's brought into Dartford Police Station. They were taken almost a year ago, on the day he was brought back into Britain after being extradited from Spain. Now a convicted murderer, he's serving a life sentence. For Stephen Cameron's parents, the end of the trial has brought justice. Their son had been painted as a road rage aggressor, a young man whose temper had led to tragedy. Today the jury dismissed that view.
Obviously it would never bring our son back, but for 4 years we wanted justice and finally got it, and we are so pleased.
Ken and Tony Cameron have been to hell and back, as has Daniel Cable and all of Stephen's friends and family. Today justice has been seen to be done. Kenneth Noye has gone to prison for life, and we all obviously believe that that is the right verdict. Thank you.
The jury was sent out at 10:40 yesterday morning. They were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. At 12 o'clock today, the judge told them he would accept a majority verdict. 20 minutes later, they came back in and pronounced Kenneth Noye guilty of murder. As the 11-1 decision was delivered, Noye showed little reaction. He simply grimaced as the Camerons leapt to their feet in victory. At a press conference after the trial, the family spoke of their continuing grief.
This is not a joyous occasion. Our lovely son Stephen is dead, and our lives will never be the same again. We will never feel the happiness that we once had. It is hard to put into words our feelings. We are still experiencing overwhelming grief.
Stephen Cameron was murdered after a roadside argument with Noye on an M25 slip road. The 21-year-old's van was being driven by his young fiancée Danielle Cable. She tried in vain to stop the fight. Stephen was left dying from 2 stab wounds in the heart and liver. Noye fled to Spain, where he lived for 2 years under a false identity. His wife, Brenda, who gave evidence at the trial, admitted visiting her husband while he was on the run. Noye was eventually arrested after Danielle Cable was flown to Spain to identify him. Danielle, seen here at Stephen's funeral, is now living under a new identity. The retired officer who traced Noye to Spain praised the investigation team.
We first of all had to establish who did it. You never heard me say who did it, but I believed I knew who did it, and then find him. And despite a number of people who said you'd never find him, we did. Not only did we find him, we had him arrested, brought back to this country and stand trial.
Noye's lawyers may now challenge the court's decision. You're going to appeal, Mr Milner?
Yes, we will be.
But tonight Noye starts his life sentence. His victim's parents say he should never be freed again. Shuli Ghosh, ITN, at the Old Bailey.
Well, later in the programme we'll have an extended report on the life and crimes of Kenneth Noye and how he became one of the underworld's most notorious and most feared figures. Wall Street is reeling tonight after hundreds of points were wiped off leading American share indexes. Speculation that the internet bubble has finally burst sent traders into a frenzy, with shares on the Nasdaq high-tech market plummeting again. Andrew Simmons has more.
From the moment it opened, Wall Street witnessed a free-fall dive in its markets after the American Consumer Price Index sparked off a panic over inflation. The Dow Jones Industrial Average suffered its worst one-day point loss ever. The share jitters spread rapidly, and the Nasdaq, rich with technology stocks, suffered more trauma. After dropping 17% in 4 days this week, it dived well beyond 20%. While the central fears were over higher than expected inflation figures leading to a hike in American interest rates, it was the high technology shares that came off the worst. The Nasdaq has crashed more than 1,000 points this week. That's a fall of 25%. It began shakily, falling to 4,188 on Monday. On Tuesday it dropped another 100 points, and by Wednesday it had plummeted well below the 4,000 barrier. Yesterday it dropped again, and today it fell a record 355 points, almost 10% to just 3,321. In London, dealers rushed to sell off technology stocks. The high-profile internet company lastminute.com hit another new low, falling 12.5 pence to 157.5 pence. It's going to be a weekend of raw nerves for dealers, with predictions of another bloodbath for technology stocks on Monday. While some may be enthused at the prospect of picking up low-priced stocks, this is the end of a depressing week for the markets. Andrew Simmons, ITN, in the City.
Here, a leading union official has accused the government of having policies which encourage racism. Bill Morris of the Transport and General Workers Union said its attitude towards asylum seekers demonstrates institutional racism. And it's also failed to show a lead in condemning racist comments. BMW received a formal new offer for the Rover car plant at Longbridge. It came from a former boss of Rover Cars, John Towers. His plan to keep Rover in business as a volume car producer is believed to involve fewer job losses than the offer from the Alchemy venture capital company. The United Nations envoy who's in Ethiopia assessing the impact of the drought there said today the only hope of saving thousands from certain starvation is for the international community to give money immediately. Our correspondent John Irvine has visited one of the makeshift camps where people are now dying every single day.
The wilderness in which they can survive is now a wasteland in which they cannot. In their thousands, the nomads are fleeing the scorched earth to congregate in makeshift camps. Many die on the journey they are forced to make. This 5-year-old boy, Abdi, is now an orphan. In the past 2 days, 300 more people have arrived. Because they are newcomers, a local charity provides them with a ration of wheat. But the food is too coarse for the babies. They eat it anyway, but many of them contract dysentery. On average, 7 children die here each day, and there is no sign of any international relief aid.
The water supply for this village has now run out. There are full water tankers about 10 miles from here. The problem is there's no diesel for the lorries. The much talked about coordinated relief effort is yet to materialize here.
They are living on hope. Today this woman lit a cooking fire, but she never got any food to prepare. During his prayers, this man asked his God to provide the help his fellow man has not. John Irvine, ITN, Southern Ethiopia.
Russia agreed today to halve the number of nuclear weapons it aims at the West. The country's new president, Vladimir Putin, persuaded the Russian parliament to ratify the START II arms reduction treaty 7 years after Russia and America actually signed it. Robert Moore reports.
It was Vladimir Putin's first foreign policy move since he was elected to the Kremlin, and this will rank as a major success, persuading the Russian parliament to ratify the START II arms treaty. He accepted the applause. He had reason to smile. Suddenly the world's nuclear arsenals will be radically cut. Russian and US warheads will be nearly halved in number over the next 7 years, allowing Moscow to switch resources from its nuclear arsenal. It also brings much closer the prospect of further deep cuts in the world's nuclear weapons. Already negotiators are busy working out a framework for a new set of arms talks. The vote to ratify the treaty comes a full 7 years after the deal was agreed on by then-Presidents George Bush and Boris Yeltsin. Russian ratification of this 1993 pact suddenly breaks the stalemate on arms negotiations. But, as Mr. Putin has made clear in Moscow today, there is one key condition. Washington must now abandon any plans to build a missile defense system, and that could still be a highly contentious matter. The Russian move could not have come at a better time. In just 3 days, Vladimir Putin will be here in Downing Street holding talks with the Prime Minister. It'll be his first visit to the West as president-elect, and it changes at a stroke the agenda. The man who conducted the brutal Chechen war is also now the man who's delivered on a major international arms treaty. Robert Moore, ITN, Downing Street.
The mystery remains tonight of what happened to the champion racehorse Shergar after a tantalising few hours in which it seemed it just might have been solved. The horse's skull unearthed in County Kerry with 2 bullet holes proved not to be that of the legendary Derby winner. Tests on the teeth showed it had been a 2-year-old. Shergar was 5. The Norfolk farmer charged with murdering a 16-year-old burglar is under police guard tonight after receiving death threats. Today, Tony Martin gave his account of what happened on the night he shot Fred Barras dead after he'd broken into his farmhouse. Eric McInnes reports.
Tony Martin left court tonight under a blanket, under police protection. The court was told they were taking these precautions because of death threats made against the farmer. He is accused of murdering a 16-year-old thief. Today, he gave his account of what happened on the night Fred Barras was shot dead. Mr. Martin said he heard noises. He was upstairs in bed in his dilapidated home, which is surrounded by trees and hogweed and covered in ivy. He said his heart was thumping. Mr. Martin claimed he loaded an illegally held Winchester pump-action shotgun and came down these stairs. The staircase has steps missing at the top and bottom where Mr. Martin had allegedly attempted home improvements. The defendant said a light was shone in his eyes from this rubbish-strewn downstairs room. He said he was blinded, felt terrified and vulnerable. In fear, he fired into the area where Fred Barras and accomplice Brendan Fearon had put down their holdalls. Mr. Martin's defence counsel said that this was a case of self-defence, a right that every citizen was entitled to. He said an Englishman's home is still his castle. But prosecuting counsel accused Mr. Martin of shooting the 2 burglars, Barras and Fearon, like rats in a trap. Eric McInnes, ITN, Norwich Crown Court.
West Yorkshire Police have welcomed today's decision by European football's governing body UEFA to ban Galatasaray fans from next Thursday's return match at Leeds. Earlier, police in Istanbul charged 4 Turkish men with the murder of the 2 Leeds fans. Juliette Bremner reports.
Leeds had made it clear that Turkish supporters wouldn't be welcome in the city. Today, UEFA granted their wish. But as they remembered the loyal fans who'd lost their lives, there was a sense of relief rather than victory.
It would have caused more trouble if they had come over, because hatred is still running high at the moment.
Nobody wants any more trouble after all this, do they? And I'm pleased with that decision, yeah.
Fearing revenge attacks after the violence in Istanbul, West Yorkshire Police said they couldn't guarantee the safety of Galatasaray fans. Now they say there's no excuse for any trouble.
We don't want to see the image of Leeds as a city or Leeds United as a football club tarnished by bad behaviour, and we encourage all fans to behave responsibly.
In the square where the fighting started, Turkish football fans thought that Galatasaray supporters should have been allowed to travel to Britain to support their team. The sports minister, Fikret Unlu, said Leeds were wrong to put pressure on UEFA and fans would be upset by the ban. But with emotions so highly charged, United said it had no choice. This has been one of the most difficult weeks in the club's history. And despite the importance of next week's game, officials and fans will be glad when it's over. Juliette Bremner, ITN, Elland Road, Leeds.
Charlton have failed to secure promotion to the Premiership, losing 1-0 to Huddersfield this evening. Clyde Winhard gave the visitors their winning goal in the first quarter. But Charlton still hold on to their considerable lead at the top of the First Division table. We return now to today's main news, the conviction and jailing of Kenneth Noye for the murder of Stephen Cameron. Noye made a lucrative career out of crime, and in this special report, produced by ITV's Tonight programme team, Colin Baker examines how he became one of the underworld's most notorious figures.
He was in the First Division of the Criminal League.
Kenneth Noye became notorious among the criminal underworld.
His temper has exposed his role as one of the most powerful criminals in Britain today.
A prince among thieves to those who courted his favours, an evil godfather of crime to the detectives determined to topple his crown. In a 30-year reign, Kenneth Noye made and salted away millions for himself. He was a grand master of his profession. His profession was crime. And this evening the cell door has been banged shut on the first night of his life sentence. Noye's story begins on the streets of southeast London. In the post-war years, it was a notorious breeding ground for criminals. Thousands moved out to the leafier suburbs of Kent, Noye's family among them. And already the young Kenneth Noye's apprenticeship for a criminal career was solid. As a child he was a petty thief, as a teenager a handler of stolen goods. By his late teens he was known to the police, and then came Borstal.
Now that spell in Borstal hardened him up a lot. He met a lot of contemporaries who were obviously going to head off towards a life of crime, and he started to observe their behaviour. He talked to them about the sort of deals that you could do on the outside and make big money, and concluded that he was better off going down that road than taking up a legitimate career like the rest of us.
On his release, Noye pursued the life of crime with increased vigour. Over the next decade he amassed convictions for theft, possession of a shotgun, an assault on a policeman and importing a firearm. But throughout this underworld career he cultivated the friendship of senior Scotland Yard detectives. Those friendships may have helped him stay out of prison, may even have got him into the Freemasons. This picture of Noye and his wife Brenda was taken at a lodge ladies' night in the early 1980s. Crime was now paying well for Noye. He was fast becoming wealthy, and he moved here to the village of West Kingsdown in Kent. He built himself a mansion befitting his status. This rising star of the underworld called it Hollywood Cottage. At this time his connections were many and diverse, and one of them was to lead to his involvement in one of the most spectacular crimes of the century. November 1983, a warehouse near Heathrow Airport. Inside, £26 million worth of gold bullion. Outside, a gang of armed and masked robbers, determined by whatever means necessary to make it theirs.
Get up on your gate!
They held the guards up at gunpoint. They were armed with automatic weapons. In order to persuade some of the guards to cooperate fully with them, they poured petrol over the groin area of at least two of the guards and threatened to set them alight.
The robbery succeeded, but the gang then faced another problem. They needed a so-called fence, someone who could turn 6,800 bars of pure gold into hard cash. One of the gang leaders was a long-time friend of Kenneth Noye's. He consulted him before the robbery. Afterwards, he turned to him again.
He persuaded Noye to help finance the initial research into this huge crime. Noye liked the sound of it. He also liked the sound of the fact that he could handle the gold bullion that was stolen from that warehouse and avoid the VAT on it as well. So there was an extra bonus in it for Noye, and that's how he became involved in the Brinksmat raid.
By November 1985, a surveillance team was installed here in these woods on the edge of West Kingsdown around Noye's home. And here officers saw a car leave. He was carrying Brian Reader, one of Noye's friends. They followed the car into central London, and there they saw Reader hand over a heavy package to a man in another car. And now the officers could smell gold. And so the surveillance here at Noye's home was upgraded, but what was soon to happen here was to not only change Noye's life, but was to bring another to a most violent and dramatic conclusion. John Fordham was an undercover detective, trained in camouflage techniques by the SAS. He was an expert in surveillance. Neil Murphy was his partner.
Me and John worked together as part of the rest of the team on lots of jobs, operations of incredible variety. John and I were the upfront officers on a lot of the armed robbery jobs that were happening in that time.
Noise inside.
January the 26th, 1985, the two officers are ordered to hide out in the grounds of Noye's home. Their mission, to catch him in possession of the stolen gold.
Noye outside, taking case. Repeat, Noye has case.
But the operation went tragically wrong when Noye's Rottweilers began barking.
Dog.
Neil Murphy left the scene and called on his partner to follow, but Fordham stayed, to be confronted by a knife-wielding Kenneth Noye.
Going up God's sake.
Go in now.
As other officers moved in to arrest Noy, an ambulance rushed Fordham to hospital. He'd been stabbed 10 times.
I went in the ambulance with him, and I remember sitting in the ambulance, like holding him onto his arm. His chest was going up and down, and I remember saying to the ambulanceman, well, at least he's alive, he's breathing, his chest's going down. And the ambulanceman shaking his head and saying, no, it's the oxygen that I'm giving him that's making his chest go up and down. So, but even then I think, I don't know, again, naive, I thought he would recover. I thought once he gets to hospital, he'll be okay. And he wasn't. And the next memory I have is the other officers coming into the room to tell me John was dead.
Noy was acquitted of Fordham's murder, the jury accepting his story that he'd acted in self-defence. But the police had found 11 bars of gold in the gardens of Hollywood Cottage. So Noy was tried for handling. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. And as he was led from the dock, he shouted at the jury, I hope you all get cancer. Noy spent 9 years, 4 months in jail, but there was still no let-up in his criminal career. Killing a policeman had earned him new underworld respect, and inside jail he continued to do his criminal deals, courtesy of a prison payphone. And just as he once cultivated friends in the police, he was now developing relationships with prison staff.
To most people, 14 years in prison should be a deterrent to committing crime. As far as Noy was concerned, it was just a matter of moving his head office from his home to inside jail. Noy had such a close relationship with certain members of staff at Swaleside Prison that shortly after he was released, he invited 2 serving criminals and 2 prison officers who were out on day release for a weightlifting competition to come and have dinner at his house. That visit caused a huge scandal in the prison service because those people, those inmates, were still Category A criminals. One of them was a murderer. But Noy was able to pick up the phone and invite them over for dinner. And that's a measure of his power and respect.
When freed, Noy emerged from jail in a stronger position than ever. He was wealthy, powerful, and the Brinkspat detectives were no longer on his trail. But then a petty roadside squabble would lead to him becoming the most wanted man in Britain.
A Land Rover Discovery, dark blue, grey. The registration, which is L794 JTF.
May 1996, and the police mount a huge manhunt for the killer of 21-year-old Stephen Cameron. A passenger in a van driven by his fiancée, Stephen had got into an argument with the driver of a Land Rover Discovery on a slip road off the M25. During that row, punches were thrown. The other driver then produced a knife and stabbed Stephen twice in the chest. The young man was left dying in the arms of his girlfriend.
I felt in danger when I got out, and I saw his knife, and I was pleading with him not to hurt Steve, and I couldn't go near him because I felt he would hurt me. I begged him not to hurt him, and just looked at me like I was dirt. And I ran round and screaming for somebody to help me, and they just all ignored me. And Steve came round, he stabbed me down, get his number plate. And I called the number plate out to him, and I just went and held him. Just blood coming everywhere, and he just looked at me and just said, please help me, and there was nothing I could do.
The appeals for information worked. When police traced the Land Rover Discovery to this address, they found it was registered in the name of Anthony Francis, an alias that had been used many times before by Kenneth Noy. And when they released this photo fit, there was little doubt about who they were now looking for.
This man's destroyed my life. I just hope he's watching this now and looking at my face and remembering that I was pleading with him not to kill the person I loved more than anything.
But within 24 hours of the road rage attack, that man had fled Britain. Knowing the police were closing in, Noy had flown to Spain, using a false name and passport. Southern Spain has long been a magnet for hardened British villains. It wasn't to Malaga or Marbella, the so-called Costa del Crime, that Noy headed for. Instead, he chose to buy a home 170 miles along the coast in the village of Atlantera. several hours away from the tourists and the other expat criminals notorious for their gossip. This was the perfect hideaway for an Englishman who'd assumed yet another false identity, that of Mick the Builder. This is the entrance to Noyes villa. He paid cash for it, £1/3 of £1 million. He chose well. From here he could monitor the only road in and out of the village. And for 23 months after Stephen Cameron's death, this is where he lived, Mick the Builder, in semi-retirement, for 23 months, totally undetected. As time went on, Noy grew more confident about being seen. He was a regular visitor to the tapas bars and the beachside restaurants. Locals also remember Mick the Builder with a string of pretty girls on his arm.
I saw him with a dark-haired girl, and he told me that's a friend from Marbella with, I think, his woman. He was very friendly, good educated, very relaxed for the thing he did.
But as an Englishman abroad, Noy began to stand out. After almost 2 years trying to track him down, Kent detectives received a tip-off that a man resembling their suspect was living here. 2 detectives arrived in town, along with Stephen Cameron's fiancée, Danielle, and as Noy sat in a restaurant, she pointed him out as the man who'd stamped Stephen to death. The following day, they prepared to make their move. Ken Noy, who believed himself to be the intellectual superior of any policeman he'd ever met, walked into a trap. He came here for dinner, his companion a tall brunette woman. It was to be a meal he never finished. It was quite literally to be his last taste of freedom. The waiter who served Noy his last meal as a free man told me what happened.
Esa noche que llegaron 4 señores vestidos normal.
That night 4 men came in dressed normally. They sat over there and then jumped on a man at a table eating with a young woman. He didn't put up any resistance. Everything happened very quickly, in about 10 seconds. I was quite surprised. He seemed quite normal. That was it, and nothing more.
You were serving at another table close by the couple when the police officers came in. Did you see whether the man looked surprised? Did he say anything?
No. Sorpresa no.
No, he didn't. He didn't seem surprised at all. He didn't offer any resistance or anything. He didn't shout or say anything. They put him in a car, and that was it. It was all very calm. The man said nothing. It all happened very quickly.
Todo fue rápido.
Noy swapped his comfortable villa overlooking the Atlantic Ocean for a prison cell, all the time maintaining his innocence and that he had nothing to do with the killing of Stephen Cameron. After 24 months, the Spanish sun had finally set on Kenneth Noy's flight from justice.
A special report by Colin Baker and the team from the ITV Tonight programme. And tonight's main headline is, of course, the guilty verdict against Kenneth Noy for the murder of Stephen Cameron, whose parents say justice has been done. Today's financial figures. The city foreshadowed the big drops on Wall Street with a mass sell-off of technology shares. The FTSE 100 sliding almost 180 points. Back in New York, as we reported, the Dow Jones plunged a record 616 points, the biggest drop for 13 years. And the pound fell a fraction of a cent against the dollar. I look now at the front pages of Saturday's papers. And of course the Noy verdict dominates most of the front pages. The Telegraph calls him an arrogant career criminal. It says the sentence concludes one of the biggest police investigations, which cost more than £1 million. The Guardian calls Noy Britain's most notorious villain, one of the most clever and powerful criminals of his generation. The Financial Times leads on the crisis in the stock markets. It has fears that the drop in the Dow Jones and the Nasdaq will be followed by a steep interest rate rise in America. Back to the Noy story, and the Daily Mail focuses on the family and girlfriend of Stephen Cameron. It says their nightmare has come to an end now that justice has caught up with Noy. The Express says he'll be kept under constant supervision after police fears that he may try to escape from prison. And that story is also in the Mirror. It claims that Noy is offering £5 million to any criminal who'll help him escape from prison. And that's all from the ITV Nightly News for tonight and this week from the entire team here tonight. Goodbye. Do have a good weekend.
Good evening. Rotten day in the southeast tomorrow, unless you're partial to a bit of cold, grey and wet, that is. The rest of us will find some sunny spells in between the showers. These satellite pictures run in a sequence from the early hours of this morning right up to date, and this is the patch of cloud we've been watching for the south and east. You can see it's heading up through the day today. Already now we've got rain across some southeastern parts, and it'll hang around well into tomorrow. Further north and west, much more broken cloud today, of course, and you will have some sunshine between the showers tomorrow. But another ribbon of cloud in the northwest, that's going to edge in towards Ireland later tomorrow and threatens one or two longer spells of rain there too. As for tonight, well, the southeast certainly has the worst of the weather, cold and grey there with outbreaks of rain. Further north and west you are, it's even colder really. Clearer skies will allow temperatures to fall below freezing, so a touch of frost across much of Britain with the temperatures in the rainy, wet southeast staying above freezing. For tomorrow, the southeast will hang on to a lot of cloud right through the day, all the way from the Wash down towards the Isle of Wight into the East Midlands at times, outbreaks of rain and some of them fairly heavy too. In the north and west, though, the rest of Britain really, a brighter mixture of sunshine and scattered showers. One or two more showers than you saw today, but still some good sunny spells around. And then later in the day, that other band of cloud I pointed out to you on the satellite picture may bring longer spells of rain into western parts of Ireland. We end up with a sandwich there, as you can see, rain in the northwest and the southeast, sunny bits in between. Temperatures, it's going to feel cold in the southeast because it's wet and windy. Elsewhere, 9 or 10. And then on Sunday, well, it's pretty much the same all round, really. Most places having some sunshine, a few showers too, but most of them probably in the south and west. Have a good weekend. Good night.
Power Gen. Power, whatever the weather.
What are your prime directives?
Come quietly or there will be trouble.
Today's daily number is...
Of course, the volcanic minerals in Volvic have no discernible effect on the people of this. They're up to something again, aren't they?
At the MFI Homework sale, there's up to 50% off, plus 10% off kitchens, off bedrooms, off sale prices right across the store, plus a 20% less guarantee on sale prices. The MFI Homework sale, with an extra 10% off, values home for good.
Starting in tomorrow's Mirror, get 2 free Better Homes magazines. Learn the tricks of the trade with 2 free Better Homes magazines starting in tomorrow's Mirror.
I wanted a top PC, so I popped down to my local Tiny showroom. My Tiny advisor recommended an Intel Pentium 3 processor, a colour printer, DVD, great software, and then he told me they'd knocked £250 off in their sale. All this for just £999, including delivery. Call now for your copy of Tiny's spring sale price list. Feel good about your PC at Tiny.
Buy any men's suit at C&A right now and we'll give you a shirt absolutely free. How's that for better value than ever? C&A today.
Programmes tonight are running approximately 15 minutes later than advertised, but now it's time for the regional news from Granada.
Good evening from the Granada News Centre. Liverpool has been named as one of the worst authorities in the country when it comes to finding homes for children placed for adoption. There are currently more than 1,000 children on Merseyside searching for adoptive parents. Emma Murphy reports.
It's the Northwest's shameful legacy. Thousands of children desperate for homes, yet every year only a tiny percentage are adopted. Of the UK's 149 authorities, Liverpool comes near the bottom, with just 9 children out of the 1,300 in care being placed with adoptive parents. The Liverpool City Council promised changes but say the situation is acute because they get so many children being placed in their care, and they focus on fostering rather than adoption.
It's sometimes easier in very hard or difficult cases to go for fostering because you can have added amount of support which can be called in at any time. On reflection, probably that was a mistake.
But what changes are you planning to make now?
I would be moving for extra training for would-be adopters and putting £120,000 into private agencies to finance adopters, and I think that all those things, with added training for staff as well, will bring us towards the national figures that I'm looking for.
Work to place children is bureaucratic and time-consuming, taking years to formally adopt. But to protect the interests of the child and ensure a suitable match, it has to be. The issue facing authorities now is how to improve standards whilst increasing the number of children being placed with adoptive parents.
Detectives in Liverpool are investigating the death of a man who was found collapsed with multiple stab wounds. Officers were called to Tinwold Hill in Tuebrook this afternoon. It's thought the man's death is linked to a disturbance at a house nearby in Moscow Drive. A man from Sale in Greater Manchester has been jailed for life for the murder of a 16-year-old schoolboy in Devon. George Mortimer was battered with a hammer and sexually abused before being left for dead in a canal last year. Phil Gornell reports.
Schoolboy rugby star George Mortimer went missing in January last year. 4 days later, police divers found his battered body in the Exeter Ship Canal near his home. He'd been sexually abused and beaten with a hammer. On the day he died, 16-year-old George had met Darren Colling to buy cannabis on his way to a party. This afternoon, a jury in Exeter took 4 hours to find Colling guilty of murdering the young rugby star. A spokesman for George's parents expressed their relief that the trial was over.
During the last 2 weeks, we have suffered stress and trauma as Colling has tried to assassinate our son's character to support his defence. As a family, we draw comfort from the fact other young boys will no longer be at risk from Colling.
Colling is now beginning a life sentence for the murder.
Doctors in Manchester are calling for couples undergoing fertility treatment to donate their frozen embryos to others who are infertile. Couples can legally store several embryos for up to 5 years. A study by fertility experts in Manchester has found that of 1,400 embryos stored over a 6-year period, nearly 70% ended up being destroyed. A prison governor who claimed she was victimised by the prison service after she stood up for the rights of prisoners has won £6,000 in compensation after winning a tribunal. Katie Dawson was in charge of Risley Women's Prison when she complained to the authorities about the conditions in the cells. Bernard Smith reports.
Prison Governor Katie Dawson's campaign to improve conditions of women inmates at Risley Prison in Cheshire irritated her male colleagues who victimised her and marginalised her job. Mrs Dawson became governor at Risley in 1994. She only learnt of its closure at a meeting to inform all other staff. An employment tribunal in Manchester agreed with Mrs Dawson that she'd been denied the chance to apply for other jobs and had been left without an office. Colleagues called her the bag lady.
Women would be moved round because of overcrowding issues, like bags of old clothes around the system, and no respect given to their dignity or their status, particularly man prisoners who would be sent long distances away from home.
An earlier sex discrimination claim was brought by Mrs Dawson in 1996. Then she agreed a compromise with the prison service. Tribunal Chairman Michael Coles said that after that case, Mrs Dawson would have been seen as a thorn in the side of the head office establishment, which they could have done without. Mrs Dawson still works here at Risley Prison, which now houses only male inmates. The tribunal described her as a dedicated and capable woman who in normal circumstances would not be regarded as anything other than an asset to the organisation. The prison service has refused to comment until it's fully digested today's ruling.
There are new hopes today for the future of shipbuilding on the Mersey after it emerged that Camel Laird is in the running for a major defence contract. Andy Gill reports.
The Ministry of Defence has invited Camel Laird to bid for a contract to build ships designed to transport vehicles, machinery and troops around the world. But Laird faces competition from 4 other British yards in Glasgow, Newcastle, Belfast and Devon. The order would be worth £138 million and would help secure existing jobs and possibly create new ones at the Birkenhead yard.
We'll be looking across the range of technical issues as well as commercial issues. We already believe that the yards have the necessary capability and capacity to do the work, and we will assess their technical solution.
In the past few years, Camel Leads made a name for itself as a ship repairer and ship converter. But if it could win this order and get ship building back here in Birkenhead, then that would be a very significant step forward. The Defence Procurement Agency will make its mind up this autumn.
Finally, a unique piece of artwork has been officially opened in Lancashire. The roundabout sculpture was crafted in Skelmersdale and depicts 12 of the town's local characters, from miners to school children. The Liverpudlian actor Ricky Tomlinson, alias Jim Royal, left his armchair to do the honours.
Like, I have a family connection with Skelmersdale, as that one of my three brothers was heavily involved in the local football team. But also, I love art. You know, when I came to art pretty late in my 40s, early 50s, and I have a few pieces, so I'm thrilled to be here. They did ask Jim Royal to be here, but Jim is at the Tate today. That's Tate and Lyle, actually, not the Tate Gallery.
And that's it from the newsroom tonight. Our next bulletin is at 1:05 tomorrow lunchtime. Until then, from all of us here, a very good night and have a great weekend.
Granada Television's weather, sponsored by Stay Bright Windows and Conservatories. The clear choice in any weather.
We can see from today's satellite sequence there was quite a lot of cloud across our region, cloud which gave the odd isolated shower, but gradually that cloud is beginning to melt away now, so some long clear spells developing during tonight, and that means a chilly night. Towards the end of the night we could see a touch of frost in many places away from town and city centres, and the lowest temperature -1 degree Celsius, and winds will remain light. Now tomorrow it's a nice start to the day, some nice sunny spells in the morning. Gradually it will tend to cloud up a little bit as we go through the day, and there's a very small chance of an isolated shower during tomorrow afternoon. But for most of us it will be a fine day. Temperature's still disappointing though. 10 Celsius is the best we can expect, but at least winds will remain light. Now looking ahead to Sunday, it's more of the same. It's a nice bright start after a touch of frost, and it'll tend to cloud up, but it'll stay mostly fine.
For a more detailed 5-day outlook, call Weather Update on 09068 55 9977.
Granada Action, sponsored by Cheshire Building Society, supporting your community.
You've just had a diagnosis that your mum's got Alzheimer's. What does it mean? What happens now? Well, we can't help your mum, but we can help you to help your mum. By understanding what it all means and by giving you advice, information and ongoing support on a one-to-one basis. If you'd like more information or are interested in becoming a volunteer with the East Cheshire branch of the Alzheimer's Society, then please call us on 01625 503302.